Good morning and welcome. I'm Noam Unger and I'm a senior fellow with the Project on Prosperity and Development here at CSIS. Today's discussion presents an opportunity to explore issues about artificial intelligence in connection to global development. Advances in AI are progressing rapidly with major implications for scientific research, technology, and so many other spheres of how our society operates. Some estimates predict AI could add $15 to $20 trillion to the global economy within this decade. But only a handful of advanced economies currently dominate AI development and regulation. As a result, current AI principles, models, and products often reflect the priorities of those countries. Across much of the rest of the world, and especially in lower-income developing countries, is the development of AI accelerating self-reliance and a path towards greater prosperity, or is it accelerating inequality? I'm fortunate to be joined by an excellent group of speakers for this discussion, each of whom brings a unique perspective to this overall topic. Ana Eceledo is the Executive Director of AfriLabs Foundation, which cultivates and coordinates a network of 400 technology and innovation hubs spread across 52 African countries and the diaspora. The AfriLabs community focuses on entrepreneurs and partnerships that power a thriving innovation economy in Africa. Ramsey Day is the head of strategy and business development at Luminix USA, an AI technology firm, and he is also a non-resident scholar in the Africa program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He has held several leadership positions at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, including as the head of its Africa Bureau, where he also oversaw government-wide initiatives such as Power Africa and Prosper Africa. Harrison Rudolph is with Meta, where he serves as an AI policy manager focused on the development and implementation of policies governing the ethical use of AI technologies. He also has prior experience at the Center on Policy and Technology at Georgetown Law. Jenny Marin is the Director of Policy and Engagement for the Institute for AI Policy and Strategy, where she works to translate research into practical guidance supporting government, industry, and civil society as they navigate the opportunities and challenges of emerging AI technologies. She also has a deep background in U.S. national security and international development policy and serves as a non-resident senior associate for the CSIS Sustainable Development and Resilience Initiative. I'm momentarily going to turn to each of them in the order that I just briefly introduced them. But before we start, I do want to mention to all of our live stream viewers that if at any point you have a brief question for our panelists, please go ahead and enter that question by clicking on the event page button that says Ask Questions. And I might be able to work those into the discussion as it progresses. All right, now let's get to the discussion. Welcome to each of you. You all spend some of your time thinking about how to harness the benefits of AI to tackle societal challenges and societal changes in developing countries. But you each come at this from a different background, a different angle. So to jumpstart the conversation, what has led you or your organization to the topic we are talking about today? And Anna, I'll begin with you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, you've already sort of given an introduction to what AfriLabs does, right? We are a network organization. We operate across 53 African countries in terms of the scale of our community and over 200 African cities. And all of our community members, which are primarily made up of innovation hubs, innovation and technology hubs, working with the broader stakeholders that we work with, whether it's corporate organizations, government, development organizations, and the likes, all work towards supporting innovators and startups with great ideas to develop them for the purpose of, successful businesses, contributing innovative solutions across various sectors, that would drive social and economic development across the continent, right? Whether we're talking about healthcare or agriculture or education. We all know the statistics, right? Number of people who are excluded from good and affordable healthcare, for example, or quality education. So these are challenges, or energy, water, so these are everyday challenges that we're looking to close the gap for African citizens and for African development through innovators, through startups, building great solutions with technologies. Now, fast forward, a couple of years ago, of course, AI isn't new. It's been in development for decades, but of course, it's taken widespread attention and adoption, across the last a couple of years. We've seen the potential of AI to accelerate development, right? And to also accelerate the development and use and adoption of some of these innovative solutions that are already built, right? So take already the health tech startup that already looks to see how it can leverage on health technology, for example, to increase access and, integrate AI into that. And, the impact is accelerated and the likes. But we've also seen the potential of AI to also leapfrog some of these infrastructural challenges, which is quite interesting because on one hand, the lack of infrastructure hinders the development of AI. On the other hand, it has the opportunity to leapfrog in terms of dealing with the challenges, infrastructural challenges. So considering the potential of AI to the African development and even to contributing to the economic growth of the African continent, we've seen AI as a critical area to develop, right? Now, these are reasons why that has led us to pay attention to focusing on AI. And then, in the last couple of years, we've also carried out some research. Last year, for example, we released two papers. One is on ethical considerations of AI, basically mapping out African government strategies, policies that address ethical issues around AI, covering different areas, which I'll give details more in the call. We've mapped AI startups and the challenges they face as well in building AI solutions and the likes. And we've actually carried out a couple of projects. Interesting to have Harrison on the call because we have an ongoing meta project as well on AI. So these are all reasons and efforts that we've carried out and data, that basically show that it's important and critical for every stakeholder in the innovation and tech ecosystem on the continent serious about development to focus on AI as a pillar to drive and to close the gaps as well.
Thank you so much, Anna. Ramsey, same question to you. What's led you to the topic that we're discussing today?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's great to be with such an august group talking about an important topic. So I come at this from a couple of different angles, actually. More of the macroeconomic and strategic side. I'm a big believer that in the Africa case that the U.S.-Africa relationship needs to evolve, really from an aid-based relationship to a trade and investment-based relationship. And I am a huge believer that AI and the broader digital transformation, I would even maybe open that aperture a little bit even into blockchain technologies, is the biggest and probably the best accelerant that I've seen in my career. And so I have focused a lot on trying to kind of analyze how could AI and the digital transformation ultimately accelerate a lot of these emerging economies. I'm a big believer also in economic principles of economic convergence, that some of the smaller and emerging economies can grow faster if the conditions are right. And so we all have a kind of a role to play in terms of setting those conditions. But AI and the digital transformation, I really do believe, I think, can be an incredible accelerant to development, particularly in the African context that I've focused so much on. And then secondly, even on the technology and the product side. So I work for a company. We have a really innovative platform technology. It's focused on the healthcare side now, but it's not limited to healthcare. And it really has, I think, we're primarily focused in the U.S. and Canadian market, but I'm fascinated and really taken by the opportunities that the technology may have in terms of particularly patient safety in developing countries and countries where patient safety issues are certainly top of mind, particularly when it comes to hospital-acquired infections and some of those issues that I think we'll probably talk about in a bit. So it's been really, really exciting time. But I come at it from a couple of different angles.
That's great. Thanks. Harrison, turning to you with the same question. What brings you, and your organization to this specific topic?
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting this conversation today. I'm glad to be able to join. I think I come from Meta, and I think for me and from where I'm sitting, we look at it through a couple different lenses. On the one hand, Meta is, I'm glad to say, one of the most prominent builders, developers, and releasers of open source AI technology. We think that an open source AI strategy is uniquely helpful for democratizing this technology, empowering developers at different sizes and at different scales to not just use AI, but to build AI. And the way that it does that is through a couple pathways. One is it helps defray some of the infrastructure costs and the computational costs that can be really, really burdensome at the outset by making the fundamental core engine of the AI technology freely available. That's sort of one piece. And then the other piece is that by making, in our case, the model weights openly available, by making that core technology free to use and free to customize, we empower developers to not just sort of take the technology that we've built and put it on the shelf the way that we fashioned it, but actually take it and customize it to make it bespoke, not just to take it and maybe adapt it to a language that we don't have necessarily the data available to train on to make it available in that language, but also to make it contextually aware, which is something that can be really challenging for a big tech company to do. And we're just really excited about the innovations we're seeing and the customizations that we're seeing to help take AI and make it available broadly. So that's one hat. The other hat that I'm wearing here is as our lead for a broad coalition called the AI Alliance that we co-started with IBM a little more than a year ago. I think we're at over 150 members now. And that's really about reinforcing that message and taking open source AI technology and making sure that we're bringing a global perspective to how we're building it and to really make sure that we're making the technology as available as possible, spreading the knowledge, spreading the resources, creating more useful and trustworthy data technology available. And that's a growth. It's still in the growth phase, but something that we're really excited about.
Great. Thanks, Harrison. And Jenny, what's your angle? Tell us about your angle on this topic.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me today, Noam, and I'm super excited for this conversation with all of you. We're going to talk a lot about the technology. What got me into this work and throughout my career has been focusing on alleviating human suffering and supporting human dignity. And so that's what drew me into conflict and stabilization work at the State Department, drove my work when I was at the White House, working with NGOs, as you mentioned, Noam, before, who are alleviating poverty and delivering humanitarian assistance worldwide. The underlying approach that I've tried to take is that the fundamental belief that I'm confident we all share here, that every person deserves dignity, deserves a safe place to be. Everybody just wants to be able to put food on the table. Everybody wants a safe place for their kids to sleep, right? And now I'm at the Institute for AI Policy and Strategy and not focused as much on the day-to-day development. But I'm in this work because I think that the AI technologies that are being developed can really be hugely transformative. Our mission at IAPS is to secure the benefits and mitigate the risk of advanced AI. We focus a little bit more on the national security implications and the development and deployment of advanced AI models. And we also think it's really important that we pay attention to the frameworks that are being put in place so that this technology can be used, adopted, shaped, innovated, like Harrison was saying, and also that we have the systems in place to address some of the challenges we all know are going to come up. I think one thing that I've seen, drawing on my background in conflict, is the history of technological advance is also the story of who is left behind and which challenges or what consequences go unforeseen. And so I'm really excited about this conversation today to dig into all of these angles because we are writing the story of the AI age now. And that's what I want to bring into this conversation.
I like that. We're writing the story of the AI age. So let's start writing. Let's start jumping into it. You know, we can get into some of the challenging issues of AI and digital divides, and we will. But first, it seems fitting to tease out a little bit more, right? You already mentioned some of these, but to tease out a little bit more about the ways that AI can advance developing countries' journeys towards greater prosperity and self-reliance. Because that's the vision, right? We want to set the vision and then we want to sort of probe it from different angles. So Anna, maybe I can turn back to you to talk a little bit more about that sort of positive vision. What do you see as sort of the benefits that AI is already bringing from some of the innovation hubs that you work with, or will bring?
Yes, I mean, the benefits we see already are quite immense. I mean, considering the rate of development at the moment, right? We've seen AI, I mean, and I know we've been given an example of one of our largest acquisitions recently, about 2 years ago, InstaDeep, right? And InstaDeep was a Tunisian startup that basically used AI in the health tech, in the health sector, right? To predict the potential onsets, of certain diseases and the likes. And, really innovative startup and all that. They got acquired by a larger pharmaceutical company and the likes, and just still doing a lot, right now in the area of vaccinations and the likes, right? We've also seen development in agriculture, in financial inclusion, right? We still have quite a percentage of people on the African continent that are unbanked, but also have challenges in terms of just accessing having access to credit facilities, right? And we all know the importance of accessing credit facilities, insurance, and the likes to basically improve the livelihoods of people, but also in terms of building businesses, right? It's access to microcredits and the likes are critical for small businesses that make a larger percentage of businesses on the African continent and basically provide livelihoods for families, and people are able to, by growing their small businesses, they're able to provide for their families, provide, education for their kids and all that. So, when we talk about technology, providing access, we're basically talking about improving everyday lives. But AI applied in the banking sector, for example, even in the, leveraging of startups, have been able to create, provide systems, right, whereby people's credit scoring and things like that can better be predicted without having to go through the robust and complicated banking system, and we've seen the application of this significantly improve lives. So, AI has also been adopted in different education systems. I was talking earlier about a project that we're currently running with Meta and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And one of the solutions that have come out of it, which we're quite excited about, is an AI-powered solution that aims to support neurodiverse students, including those with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and the likes, which can, help to tailor education content to students like these, right? I mean, these are, again, gaps that we find in education whereby either by lack of training or unavailability of teachers or schools, even in certain areas with specialized or without education for students with special needs. These solutions are basically closing the gap, right? So, I mean, these are a few of the applications of AI that we've seen drive development, right? And with further investments into the space, we can definitely see more.
Yeah, so making, a lot of those examples are examples of making things, some of them were making things faster, making things more accessible,
Yeah.
making things better and for a lot of people, but the penetration and usage matters a lot. Yeah. Ramsey, I know you've looked at some of that and have thought about some of these same issues. So tell us more about sort of.
Yeah, well, perhaps I could maybe zoom in a little bit, and maybe we even talk about a specific innovation that we're trying to bring to the table, which I started looking at some of the big challenges, particularly in the healthcare space in Africa and in some other developing countries. And one of the things we saw was that particularly in Africa, hospital-acquired infections were a big problem. Hospital-acquired infections. So
hospital-acquired infections.
Yep.
Okay.
So you go into a hospital, there could be hygiene or sanitation issues, and ultimately you get an infection that even complicates maybe an issue that you already had. And so In some cases, you also have immunocompromised patients that might be in those hospitals. So some scenarios, you have 40% of the hospital population may have TB or HIV. So they're immunocompromised. So getting an infection is a much more complicated scenario. And so how do you prevent those types of infections? Our technology is a platform technology, an ambient intelligence platform. We actually marry up a hypersensitive infrared scanning laser. It's a device that goes into the hospital room. It runs all of that data through a neural network, so the artificial intelligence component, and that enables the device to map the room, creates a 3D point cloud so it can identify human beings from tables to chairs and of course the patient. And it ultimately can observe, understand, and even predict human behavior in a clinical environment. And so if you can predict human behavior, then you can potentially prevent adverse events from happening before they ever happen. So things like hospital-acquired infections through increased hand hygiene, meaning if you don't wash your hands via the protocol of that particular hospital and you're on a trajectory to actually engage the patient where a pathogen could potentially be transmitted, the device will actually engage audibly.
Like warning, you haven't washed your hands yet.
Exactly.
Right?
It'll beep, or they'll have an audible message saying, please wash your hands. Or even if a patient shouldn't be getting out of bed, does get out of bed, maybe they're a fall risk, it can notify the nursing station. So it gives you full intelligence as to what's actually happening in a room, which also gives nurses support to understand what's actually happening in a patient room without actually being in that room. And then we can also do things like asset tracking, so to save time. So there's workflow optimization elements to it. So it really is an assistant within the hospital. But in the context of developing countries, particularly when it comes to patient safety and patient protection, patient duress, those types of things, this is where I really see an opportunity for expansion when it comes to saving lives in developing countries, mainly because these infection rates are so high. Then you add in the immunocompromised nature of many of the patients that might be in those hospitals, and then the mortality rates are going, essentially through the roof. In some cases, north of 20%, and in some cases, you have hospitals that have an infection rate of 1 in 5, 1 in 7 patients are getting an infection. And so those are the numbers that you actually ultimately really have to combat. And then these types of technologies can really combat those issues.
So good concrete example. I appreciate that. Harrison, let me turn to you. What about where do you see sort of the current and future benefits in developing country context?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Well, I think I would start by saying, because it's such a crux for how Meta looks at these issues, that open source AI is really in the company's DNA. It started with building and open sourcing PyTorch, which is the sort of core foundational framework for building most AI research and AI technology today. So free and open source core infrastructure through projects out of our research org, like No Language Left Behind, which has graduated and laddered up to a partnership with UNESCO to bring multilingual translation across 200 different languages and to make that publicly and freely available out of our fundamental AI research org, to what we call our Data for Good program, where we use AI to build population density maps that we were able to partner with the World Health Organization on to help increase polio vaccinations. So there's a long history of using and building AI in an open and openly available way. Where that's graduated to at this moment is really our Llama family of open source AI models. And what we're seeing with Llama, and what we're really excited about for Llama, is that core technology, by making large language models freely and openly available, and not just accessible through a cloud service provider, an online website, or an API, but actually giving the core technology away, that instead of developers and small businesses, sort of pinging Meta and saying, "Hey, Meta, can we get some information back?" You're actually able to take the technology and build it for yourself. So, we're seeing projects like this thing called Digital Greens Farmer Chat. It's an app built on top of Llama. It's able to bring agricultural advisory services to farmers in underserved areas, and that's across like India, Kenya, and Nigeria. And that's using our Llama technology and giving folks the opportunity to build on it, create new programs that they own and that they serve up, and that in many cases we would not have the sort of knowledge, contextual awareness to be able to build ourselves. And so we're really thrilled about that.
Great. Jenny, same question to you also on sort of the vision, the positive vision.
Yeah, our other guests here have spoken about some of the same themes that are really exciting to me. The development, both of you, Harrison and Anna, mentioned agriculture and agricultural development, and I had an opportunity to see a prototype years ago, and I would be very excited to see where it is now, but of a AI tool. It was being developed out of Penn State, one of the Feed the Future innovation labs with USAID, to identify pests and diseases in crops, provide predictive tools, give farmers access to the types of solutions that they might need. And that, again, was years ago. The technologies available today, the Llama platforms that Harrison's talking about, really provide the opportunity to disseminate that knowledge, increase, I think the read at the time was increasing crop yields by like 30%, right? The opportunity to connect students in across countries, and actually across time zones, across countries, create personalized coaching, fill in the educational gaps we know we all have. All of these things I'm hugely excited about. I'm also really excited about the opportunity for scientific discovery. We've talked a bit about accessibility and making things faster. I'm also excited about what might be entirely new. We know we have problems that we need to solve. Are there advances in materials science that are actually going to be enabled by being able to speed up R&D and discovery that are actually going to solve some of help to address some of the development challenges? And finally, I'm really excited about the better predictive modeling and targeting of scarce resources. Again, we talked about it a little bit, but we know that policy attention is scarce, resources are scarce.
And getting, in some cases, more so. I mean, in some cases, like you're seeing in the US, in the UK, some of these sort of aid development donors are actually reducing some of the resources that are going to some of these issues. It's unclear whether philanthropy is going to be able to fill the gap. It's always been unclear to what extent you can really tap the private sector financial flow. So we are in a resource-constrained environment.
Right, and we have always been in a resource-constrained environment, right? And there have long been tools trying to increase prediction of where is the next hotspot going to be, where is the next drought going to be, where, right? And so that you can move those resources. And I think the tools that are being developed now are going to increase the efficiency of those and make us be able to move, hopefully, into a more preventative space.
Yeah. Did you have something that you wanted to add on that? So I think we've talked about some of the benefits, and we can keep sort of layering those into the conversation. But we intentionally titled today's session with a question about whether AI is accelerating self-reliance or accelerating inequality. I mean, Ramsey, you talked about it as an accelerant. The question is, what is it an accelerant of, right? I mean, what concerns do you focus on with regard to AI and inequality? Anyone want to jump in? And I'll turn to you first, and then we can just sort of jump in.
Yes. So I suppose I would say both, right? So on one hand, and we've all established here that it is accelerating, it is promoting self-reliance in some aspect, but on the other hand, due to certain challenges and gaps, it is accelerating inequality, right? With AI development, growth, and adoption across various sectors, we've seen different challenges, and I'll even speak within the context. I'll speak within two contexts, right? One within the context of startups and the challenges they faced, even building AI solutions, and the gaps, as well as on the other side the policies as well, right? Which significantly can accelerate development or can widen the gap, right? So in terms of startups, there are challenges around lack of funding, right? This in terms of development funding, but also, angel investor, private capital, VC funding and the likes, right? When we look at the global AI divide, Africa captures less than 1% of AI investments globally, right? And we're looking at AI projected to contribute $15.7 trillion globally. But then, the investment that comes into AI in Africa is quite low. When we talk about AI research, and the contribution of local data sets, right, that are feed to our context, our cultures, our languages and the likes, which will drive inclusion, right, as opposed to widening the gap. There's still huge gaps there, and over 85% of AI research and data sets still come from, other the global north and the likes, and this further widens the gap and the likes. There are regulatory barriers, lack of access to data, and the likes, right? And then inadequate infrastructure, right? I would say COVID was a period where we really saw the infrastructure gap, and I am concerned that, with things sort of back to normal, this is something that we can easily ignore. During COVID, for example, we saw the huge gap in education. There were students that lost years, of education because they had to stay at home. And unlike those that had access to good internet facilities and mobile devices and the likes, that were able to continue their education via mobile technologies and over the internet, we had, millions of students who were stuck at home without any alternative to continue their education because schools were shut down and the likes. So this is, an example that is still replicated as well when we look at AI and access as well, that without access to good infrastructure for the builders, the innovators, the startups, and also for the users as well, this can further the divide. Now, another as well is, we carried out research last year looking at governments, African governments that had mapped out, that had developed AI strategies and policies on the continent. And our results came out that about 4 governments have actually developed the strategy.
We seem to have a connection problem with Anna, and we'll hope to.
Right.
Oh, there we go.
40% were in the
She's back.
process of validating the strategies, and just about 12% were either at the initial stages or still sort of figuring out what to do. And the ethical strategies that were of most importance and which again need to be tackled in order to deal with the inequalities and other biases as well. Data privacy and security, reliability and robustness of data, accountability and responsibility of usage, bias and fairness, and then African cultural considerations. So these are all areas that we have to ensure that, stakeholders across the board, we all have a responsibility, from the big corporations to the innovators, to the government, setting policies and strategies and regulations to guide these areas. These are all areas that we have to ensure that we are addressing to ensure that we don't further widen the gap. But AI, is used to further drive development, drive inclusion in a fair way, ensuring there are no gender biases. AI has the ability to even widen the gender gap as well, and widen certain biases and the like. So, yeah, it's two ways. It has a potential of accelerating inequality, but if we address all these areas, I believe that we can, tackle the challenges of inequality as well.
I would just maybe underscore that what Anna said is, and I agree with everything that she said. I would even say that I think there are going to be winners and losers, just like in any other type of technological environment. Some countries are going to do better than others. Some companies are going to do better than others. If I can cheerlead Africa a little bit, I think it's one of the most entrepreneurial places on the planet. I think we're going to see, obviously, this kind of demographic tsunami. This is a very digitized, digital-minded community. And young Africans are really looking to the digital world as their economic opportunities. I completely agree that I think the regulatory policy framework is going to be critical. I think the African continent is still lagging behind. I think real regulatory policies that I think are going to be important to combat some of the inequalities. I think the U.S., I think Europe are light years ahead of where they are. That needs to be something that is focused on. I also think that is somewhere where the economic partnership between the U.S. and African countries can play a role, and the African Union can play a role. So I'm really hopeful that the new administration will have that as part of their kind of economic policy efforts, to work with the African Union and individual African countries to work on these policy and regulatory frameworks that are so important, I think, to ensure that the inequality issues don't come up, but it actually really accelerates their economic growth. So, but I do think there's going to be winners and losers. Some are going to do it well, some aren't going to do it as well.
Yeah, yeah, and Harrison, what do what keeps you up at night from the inequality side of the work, and how do you try to mitigate that? Well, we seem to we've lost Harrison for a second. So Jenny, same question to you. I mean, you all think about this, and it's like, and I know you think about it from a sort of security and privacy standpoint as well. And Anna was raising some of those points.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit of a contingency planner by nature, so I just acknowledging that I see, again, huge benefits, but the same technology that can give us all of those benefits creates the potential for surveillance, privacy risks, et cetera. The exact same type of technology that you're talking about that can be so transformative in a healthcare setting.
Yeah.
Takes on an entirely different connotation applied to law enforcement.
Yep.
Right? And so when you think about the regulatory frameworks that you talk about, like, it is really important that we're not creating accidental test beds for where people are not protected in some way, where their privacy is not protected, where we don't exactly know what the outcomes are going to be. So that's the lens through which I look at that, is when we think about making sure that we're not driving more inequality, when we're making sure that we want to get this technology into the hands of others. I think it's really important just to recognize the dual nature of it, right? Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about economic development. Mm-hmm. It can drive real gains in the formal economy and in the informal economy. Why would it not be able to support conflict economies and elicit corruption, right? And so how do you those are some of the things, and if that happens, which I assume it will, because as you said, there are always winners and losers, then you really are gonna drive more inequality. And another thing that I just wanted to raise, it's less of a technological point, but again, a human one. It's not the silver bullet, right? We have had some of these opportunities for a long time. The predictive, I think about the famine early warning system. They've used a lot of modeling for a long time. Sometimes it's not that we don't know where challenges are going to be. It's that it exists in political and human systems that have to make choices about what to do with the information. So maybe we can create decision support structures that also help to enable better decision making in use with this technology. But that's just a structural piece I also wanted to invite into the conversation.
Well, but doesn't AI hold the potential, or even already allow for that next step? I mean, we think of it as tools, and we think of like the famine early warning system as a tool to provide the sort of basic information on which humans then make decisions. But AI can go further and actually aggregate a tremendous amount of data and information, and also actually make certain decisions based on those data, right? And can be used in that way to support decision making. What are the implications there?
Absolutely can. You can, and I think that this, again, is the question about how you put into place the frameworks through what decisions is it allowed to make, right? Which resources is it allowed to move? Absolutely, we can take this, but that still comes down to which challenges you're going to prioritize addressing. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And a lot of this, I mean, does come back to these issues of regulatory, the regulatory issues, the policy environment in which this exists.
I think also the conditions too,
okay.
And the environmental conditions, in the sense of, I think one of the elephants in the room, of course, is energy access and energy, and as well as internet connectivity. I think Anna touched on this as well. AI needs electricity and it needs internet connectivity, and it actually needs a lot of it. So I mean, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 1 million GPUs are needed to ultimately service the AI centers and the data centers, all the AI training that the African continent will need. And that'll draw about the same as about a small city. And so there are major energy issues, I think, that are impacted by this, as well as internet connectivity. So I think that gets to, a lot of these. But these are some of the major issues. And intuitive data governance that I think we've already mentioned. But the two big ones for me, I think, in many ways, are got to solve energy issues on the African continent as well as internet connectivity.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, this gets to another aspect, the broader sort of structural aspect of the inequality issues, Anna, as well. Because, I mean, all of those sort of innovators and entrepreneurs that you're working with across so many African countries have to contend with some of these challenges where, even in advanced economies, the energy issues are very real. And in economies that are struggling to actually sort of electrify, it's even, there's even a greater propensity to be left behind, despite all of the entrepreneurial, innovative spirit that you're describing, Ramsey. I don't know, Anna, if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a real issue, right? This is something that innovators face every day. This is something various stakeholders, face every day. I mean, if we look at healthcare, for example, we have hospitals that have challenges with, even just energy access, to perform basic medical activities, and they have to rely on alternative sources of energy and the likes. Thankfully, there's a lot of, with the drive towards more sustainable energy and the likes, there are alternative sources of energy now that are being driven and promoted on the continent, such as solar-powered centers and the likes. But the fact is, so two things I would say. We absolutely need a very strategic and intentional approach. I believe government has a big role to play. I think those of us in the private sectors and the development space have done as much as we can, and we'll keep pushing, But the governments, and I'm quite glad to see quite a number of African governments have taken initiative, to develop their AI strategies and the likes. But two ways, right? Is one, taking a sector-specific approach, right? So if we look at healthcare, for example, and it's interesting because this is one of the things that our research also brought out, right? That there were certain sector priorities that have even been identified broadly by government. So we're looking at healthcare, agriculture, education, finance and banking, technology and telecommunications, security, and then the others fall into, others and the likes, right? So if we look at things from a sector-specific approach, then we're looking at all the stakeholders within the sectors, right? We're looking at the innovators, we're looking at the corporates, we're looking at the researchers, right? How intentional are we around driving AI research, for example, into, the space? If we talk about agriculture, for example, how intentional are we in ensuring that even the agricultural strategies and agenda, is integrated into the AI policy? So what we find a lot, especially within government, is that there's a department or there's a ministry that handles technology, and they're focused on the AI part, on the infrastructure and the likes, and then we have all the other sector specific industry ministries, and you're doing your own thing, but we can't afford to do that anymore. If we're handling an education ministry, how can the data and research and all of that feed into our AI strategy under education? And then how can we drive more private sector investments into the space? When we talk about data centers, how can we make a financial case for data centers with private sector contributing to data centers? What would that potentially look like, and the likes? But it really needs a multi-stakeholder approach, and we need a sector-specific approach as well that looks at everything end to end. We can't continue to do things in silos. There is literally no time for that, as well as AI is, accelerating development and also accelerating the divide. We also need to accelerate our approach in bringing everybody to the table, right? Yeah.
I think Anna touched on a really important point here about how to attract foreign direct investment. And
Yeah.
this, of course, has been a very challenging issue over the last several decades, particularly in the African context. While this is not a panacea, I would certainly offer that the digitization of these economies is absolutely critical. So everything from title ownership to enhancing the rule of law, understanding that if a U.S. or international company wants to invest in a particular country, they need to know that they can move their money in and get it out at a time of their strategic choosing, right? And it needs to be digitized. So the more these African countries, again in the Africa context, but everywhere else as well, can digitize their economies and their government services, it increases their transparency, it de-risks the viewpoint from the investing company. And this is, again, not a panacea, but it is one of the major challenges that I think we see in terms of moving capital onto the continent that could really ultimately really advance their ability to attract foreign direct investment. So I totally agree with Anna on that.
Yeah. There was an issue earlier that Harrison from Meta mentioned, which was about sort of open source, making it available. I think that there seem to be some tensions between different approaches. You know, some seek to control and clamp down on AI technology from a regulatory standpoint, from a policy standpoint, due to concerns about security or privacy or proprietary methods. But there are other approaches that propel truly open source, platforms for adoption, adaptation, innovation. How fast is too fast when it comes to sort of AI development, or how slow is too slow? There seem to be risks in either direction. So I want to sort of unpack that a little bit. And how are open source approaches to AI affected by recent advances that sort of tip the scales, right? We just a couple months ago had DeepSeek come onto the scene. People have referred to it as a Sputnik moment for China's AI development when it dropped. And it quickly became the most downloaded free app on the Apple iStore in the US. Let's talk about some of that with regard to sort of open versus closed and sort of some US or Western-led models versus Chinese-driven AI, because that seems to be a big issue on the table. Anna, you work with innovators and innovation hubs across Africa. How do you see sort of some of these issues with regard to sort of open versus closed systems and getting to some of those societal benefits that we've been talking about so much?
It's a tough one, I would say, because on one hand, as an innovator, we would say we do not want any regulation at all, so just allow us to innovate, test, have no restrictions, and that way we can build, we can push to market, we can test, we can reiterate, and then the impact can be felt as quick as possible. On the other hand, from the regulatory side, and as a leader, and looking at just responsible development, addressing security risks, addressing consumer protection, even in terms of use of data, addressing security as well. Regulation is important, right? I would say it's tough to know what a perfect balance would be. Maybe we could use AI to sort of kind of formula, but I think the way would probably be through adopting a regulatory sandbox, to see, okay, how can we have the innovators come together and have the regulators come together and, sort of build and test solutions within a sort of controlled and semi-flexible environment, while testing the risks, while looking at what the potential challenges will be. Because I'll say that, to be fair, in a number of governments, the reason why there's a crackdown early is because there's lack of understanding, of what the risks are, of how to deal with it, how to mitigate it, on what systems to build in the event that there is a potential danger that has emerged as a result of using these technologies. But within a regulatory sandbox, some of these things can be tested, can be predicted, mitigating strategies can be built as well before, and all of these can be done within a controlled environment before there's scale and push into the markets as well.
But do
So
you,
that's what
Anna,
I'm
do
saying.
you,
It's
do
a
you,
hard challenge, but maybe there are ways to sort of deal with them.
do you worry at all, or do all the innovators, I should say, across, I think it was 400 different sort of innovation hubs, are you worried about export controls and the impact of those export controls on the AI industry for the ability of those innovators to do what they do, which is innovate and build, helpful platforms for these systems?
So when you say, could you just clarify what you
Well,
mean
I guess
by export
I'm
control?
thinking of it in terms
The
of
technologies leaving, yeah.
we are in the midst of an intense and intensifying geostrategic competition, right?
Yeah.
And some of these issues, it's not just the AI industry, it's not even just the tech industry as a whole, but a lot of different sectors and industries are caught up in this geostrategic competition, and that leads to certain export controls, from the US, from other countries around the world, and that sort of will affect countries that are sort of trying to make use of these inventions and innovations and adapt them. Is that a concern from your perspective?
Yes. Again, sometimes I like to take the two hats. So from an innovator's perspective, yes, it's a concern, right? Because at the end of the day, especially as an innovator when you're looking to raise investment, right? One of your strongest points that you can make to an investor is to say, you know what, I'm building a solution, and the solution, like let's look at the African market, for example. We're looking at a population of over 1 billion people, right? And then we're also looking at a global population as well. And when you look at any successful startup, the ones that have reached the unicorn status, and beyond, right? Over $1 billion valuation within 3 to 5 years. All of them deploy their solutions outside your markets, right? So the ability to scale within your region, within your continent, outside your continent is one of the critical success indicators or potential success indicators of a startup. So if you're building a solution, and of course there's a risk of being controlled to limit your ability to scale to other markets, then yes, it's a concern. There's also the concern about, especially for social enterprises and impact-focused enterprises, of course, there's that concern about limiting speed to impact, in other cases. Now, so that's a concern. On the other hand, I think the concern, especially considering the geopolitical, considerations and concerns, and national sovereignty and all that, is there's a need to protect, and manage how much of our technologies go out there. US has concerns, other countries, across the world have these concerns. But I think we really do need to take a global cooperative approach, to this, to say, we need to share information, we need to share data, we need to share technologies. How much do we share and how much do we protect is where we need to find that balance, It's technology, for example. It's interesting, the other time I was a judge on a hackathon with startups building solutions in the defense industry. And these startups had a lot of data, that they were working with the, with the Army, with the Navy, and all of that, some developing solutions that had to do with, mapping entire regions for security, some health, some, and I mean, as a government, you would ask yourself, can this technology, for example, be acquired by a foreign company, for example, with all this data and everything? Probably not, but it's a private company, so they should be allowed to by, industry standards. But then again, how do you manage protecting data, sensitive data, while still allowing startups to scale, to be able to do business, to be able to be invested in, to share data, and the like. So that, again, balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Thanks.
I'll let the really smart people dive in on this one, but I'll just quickly say I'm a limited government and a low regulation person, and I think high regulations really stifle innovation and startups, and I think that wouldn't be the right way to go. But at the same time, I would also say I do think the U.S. needs to get in this game because if we don't, then the Chinese will. And they will shape this ecosystem and this regulatory environment, and I don't think that's in our national.
But when you say the
strategic
U.S., you mean the U.S. government?
I do.
Yeah.
I think they should be engaged. I think they should be engaged in the conversation and be partnering, in this case with African countries and multilateral institutions in Africa like the African Union. Because again, I think if we don't, then there'll be others who will.
We have a question that's come in from one of the people viewing the live stream, Alaris Grant from it was the consul at the Embassy of the Bahamas, right? So a small island state, asking a question: in what ways can advanced economies help the global South, particularly small island developing states, put in place AI infrastructure for economic development? And I think that this is a it plays into some of these questions of rising challenges globally. On the one hand, we've talked about geostrategic competition, certainly worldwide, but including in the Pacific, small island states are a place of heightened tension for geostrategic competition. But also we've had rising physical risk with regard to extreme weather events. And so if you think about small island nations across the Caribbean hit by hurricanes and the like, how can AI infrastructure help with that? Well, there are lots of ways, but how can the U.S., specifically we're talking about government, how can the U.S. engage on these issues to build up that AI infrastructure? Thoughts?
I think that's a really interesting question, and one of the things that as I was listening to Anna talk, that I was thinking about is, you're right, it doesn't have to be binary, right? We all wear multiple hats. It's not open versus closed. It's not overly regulatory versus free-flowing innovation. We need to invest in, and this is where I think the U.S. government can play an important role, is investing in the reliability, assurance of these technologies, helping to create the standards, and in consultation and in working with other countries around the world to develop the standards that will help innovators feel secure, particularly smaller companies feel secure with the technology that they are building, right? And I think we've seen it in the U.S. that the work that NIST does to help create standards and frameworks that companies can adhere to is really important. All companies don't have the ability and in-house knowledge, the funding, et cetera, to develop those on their own, right? And I think an important role for the U.S. in the world here is to be the leader on that assurance and reliability technology and R&D, so that we can create exactly the types of situations that Anna is talking about, where people are able to build. I think we have to really remember that the technology that is being built here, we fundamentally don't understand. Right? The companies building it say they fundamentally don't understand it. And so that makes it different. And that doesn't mean you go overly regulatory, but it means you need it's not how fast or too slow. It's what are the scaffolding and systems that you need to have in place to be able to respond as the investments happen. And I think the U.S. has a role to play with the Bahamas, with other countries, in making sure that they've got the scaffolding in place to be able to use these tools to the best effect.
Yeah, I would add too. I do think, there are roles that I think that the U.S. government can play. I kind of run back to my home touch point of digitization. So whether it's the Bahamas or anywhere else, the more these countries can digitize, put these policies in a digital form, it increases the transparency. And the U.S. government, I think, can really do play a role in these, in that there could be economic policy advisors that are maybe even embedded in various ministries, with the goal of showing partner countries what it ultimately is going to take for American companies to ultimately want and to see that country as an economic destination. That's ultimately what that economic partnership should look like. So I do think there can be a role, and that comes in a lot of different forms, but economic policy advisors, maybe embedded in these ministries,
Sure.
Is one way of doing it. But the goal, ultimately, in my opinion, should be the digitization of these economies to increase the transparency, decrease either the real or perceived corruption issues, to get to de-risk private sector investment and even pension funds and sovereign wealth funds and all kinds of other institutions. But a lot of it comes down to de-risking. And how do you de-risk? You bring transparency into the mix.
Anna, let me bring
Yep.
you in for 30 seconds before we close. You were responding
Yeah,
to...
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just basically just feeding off the previous speakers, right? I would say, yes, the US government has a very strong role to play. And I would even reference our experience with the US government. A couple of years ago, we signed, I mean, that was in the past administration, we signed a partnership with the Office of Global Partnerships under the US State Department. And this was basically focused on driving cooperation between US businesses and African businesses, right? And this was specific within the climate industry, climate entrepreneurs, big corporates interested in investing in the climate sector and climate innovations, but then there was a general agreement to have it be, cover other areas of interest as well. So I think the US really has an important role to play in even just mobilizing the private sector as well, who are looking for avenues to invest in, profitable ventures, to invest in infrastructure, to engage African innovators, stakeholders, and involved in development across any spectrum, whether we're talking about, the nonprofit development side of things, or we're looking at the core business investments, expectations of, financial returns, which there are so many profitable investment-ready projects, that are focused on infrastructure development on the African continent. And these are ways that the US government can play a role in, driving development in infrastructure.
Well,
AI in Africa.
thank you to all of our speakers. We're going to have to leave it there, but this has been a fascinating conversation. And please join us again at the Project for Prosperity and Development at CSIS, and thank you for joining us.